Hey there guys, alright, today we are back with some more history matters, this time 10-minute history, the decline and dissolution of the Soviet Union. And look at that, I'm assuming that's Stalin right there. Yeah, that's gotta be Stalin, with that thick fucking mustache. Now before we dive into the video, make sure to go check out the my description box or my pinned comment in the comment section below, where you can find a link to my gaming channel where I'm uploading old streams to, or go ahead and just follow me over at Twitch, where I stream Monday, Tuesday, Wednesdays, Fridays, and Saturdays from 6 p.m. to 9 p.m. U.S. Central Standard Time. Love to have you guys come over, follow, and join the chat. Now that that's out of the way, go ahead and dive into the video.
1953, and Joseph Stalin is dead. Stalin's previous policies of purging those who disagreed with
Two
him
people I dislike. Sounds about right.
of terror, meaning his death left everyone feeling a bit
What,
nervous, to say the least. His most likely heir was Lavrenti Beria, who ran the internal security forces, which importantly included the secret police, the MGB. This wasn't to be the case, since the other potential successors, Georgy Malenkov, Stalin's former deputy, and Vyacheslav Molotov, the foreign minister, teamed up to remove him. As a result, in late 1953, he came down with a fatal case of being shot.
I do believe those that tends to be pretty fatal. I think there's much recovery from that.
So which one of these two would succeed Stalin? It was neither, since in late 1953 Nikita Khrushchev, who was head of the Moscow branch of the Communist Party, managed to climb to the top of the pile, due in most part to the support of high-ranking officials and military leaders, the most notable being Field Marshal Georgy Zhukov. Instead of doing what Stalin did and executing his rivals, Khrushchev simply demoted or fired them, as he would later do to Zhukov. However, he did follow Stalin's footsteps by holding the two highest offices in the USSR simultaneously. The first was the General Secretary of the Communist Party, who was in charge of party
control doctrine and chose who rose up the ranks.
And importantly, who would rise through its ranks. The second was the Premier of the Soviet Union, a position which controlled the government itself.
Handed out jobs, and jobs could only go party members.
Of communist doctrine, and importantly could give nice jobs with all sorts of benefits to his allies.
Yay.
Incidentally, those who filled these bureaucratic jobs were collectively known as the nomenklatura, and it was immensely corrupt. So Khrushchev's early
sounds like the Soviet Union.
Premiership was troubled, and he wanted to implement sweeping changes to reform the USSR. One issue was rioting throughout the system of labour prison camps, better known in the West as the gulags. These riots were repressed, but over the following years many prisoners were released.
Set them free, but not all of them.
Back into society, and they promptly told everyone how awful it all was.
It sucked.
He also, partly to make himself more popular, transferred control of Crimea from the Russian authority to his native Ukrainian one. In 1956, at the Communist Party Congress, which was a nationwide meeting of high-ranking party members, Khrushchev denounced Stalin in what is called the secret speech. This criticized
Khrushchev made sure no record of the speech was kept. It denounced Stalin's purges, his cult of personality, and his mass deportations, and they would also start, I believe, tearing down Stalin's statues.
Stalin's use of repression and false trials, his use of mass deportations, and his attempts to create a cult of personality around himself. The pledge was that the USSR and Soviet communism in general would need to change if it was to survive, which ushered in a period known as de-Stalinization. This doesn't mean that the USSR was suddenly a free nation. It wasn't, and it still didn't tolerate
except that you can't say that.
Less likely to shoot you for it. Instead, a person who now held what were deemed to be socially dangerous opinions would simply lose their jobs or were forcibly admitted to psychiatric hospitals. So the 1950s and early 60s were a time of great change for the USSR, and Khrushchev led several initiatives to enact such change. He was in office when the USSR detonated its first hydrogen bomb, a more powerful form of nuclear weapon, and also when Sputnik, the first artificial satellite, was launched into orbit. 1961 saw the greatest triumph of the Soviet space program, when the USSR became the first nation to achieve manned spaceflight after putting Yuri Gagarin into orbit. It should be noted that the Soviet space program
was engaged in a competition with the America known as the space race. Its primary purpose was to test military technology. Yep, that's something that I think gets left out of the space race. It was for military purposes entirely.
The program was less about carrying satellites and men into space and more about testing rockets to see if they could carry the aforementioned hydrogen bombs to America, where they would promptly explode. Khrushchev also spearheaded agricultural reform. In what was called the Virgin Land Initiative, he sought to harness technological advances to create a large belt of farmland. These virgin lands were to be planted with the special crop, corn, which Khrushchev was a little bit obsessed with. Initially, corn did very well, but after some bad weather, corn harvests were devastated and Khrushchev looked like an idiot. With respect to foreign policy, Khrushchev had to deal with many crises. Khrushchev aimed for a policy of peaceful coexistence with the West because as far as he was concerned, the march of progress would inevitably end with capitalism losing out to communism. His aims were undermined, however, when a speech he gave on the matter included the famous line, "We will bury you," which sounded a little bit like a threat. In the
That's a fucking threat, dude. There's no, we will bury you. There is no way you can twist that into making it not sound like a fucking threat.
The Warsaw Pact, made up of the USSR's communist puppet states, uprisings against Soviet overlordship broke out in 1956, the most notable being in Hungary, which were fiercely crushed. 1961 was an especially troublesome year.
Fucking corn, dude. Bad news, Nikita.
There was the U-2 crisis, which saw America continue to fly reconnaissance missions over the USSR despite its protests.
Stop, please.
It also saw the Berlin crisis, wherein US and Soviet tanks had a tense standoff at Checkpoint Charlie in the co-occupied city, leading to the construction of the Berlin Wall. Furthermore, 1961 was the year of the Sino-Soviet split, in which Chairman Mao and the People's Republic of China denounced the USSR and its leaders as traitors to the communist cause.
And then the Chinese would do that same thing later, and you cannot, current Chinese state, not fucking communist, not whatsoever. They're capitalist.
Of course, the most famous event of Khrushchev's premiership occurred in 1962, the Cuban Missile Crisis. This was when he agreed to place nuclear weapons in Cuba at the request of Fidel Castro, its new communist leader. America was not happy with the idea of having hostile nuclear weapons so close and so blockaded Cuba. As Soviet ships approached, it looked like nuclear war was on the horizon, but cooler heads prevailed and the ships turned back. In the end, it was agreed that the USSR would remove weapons from Cuba, and in return the US would secretly remove nuclear weapons from some NATO states. Publicly,
Turkey in particular.
It looked like the USSR had simply backed down though, which made Khrushchev look weak and his reputation was badly damaged. His reforms and the fact
I'm in charge forever
that he didn't consult other party members on policy was deeply unpopular, and so in 1964 he was ousted from power and forced into retirement. He did get to live though, so that was nice.
That's pretty epic. That's nice of them. Such a good guy.
He was replaced by Leonid Brezhnev, who held less direct power than his predecessors and would consult other high-ranking party members. Brezhnev became the general secretary, and the premiership went to his close ally Alexei Kosygin. Both of these men were unhappy with Khrushchev's previous
Your reforms suck, old man.
Liberalizing reforms and sought to undo many of them. One means of doing this was to enforce stricter standards on the Warsaw Pact, the most notable being Czechoslovakia, who had recently relaxed their censorship laws. This was unacceptable, and so, with the assistance of some other members of the Warsaw Pact, the USSR invaded and put an end to any reforms there. This sort of intervention in other communist states formed the backbone of Soviet foreign policy, known as the Brezhnev Doctrine. Under Brezhnev, the USSR famously entered a period of economic stagnation. There are many reasons for this. The first was that prices were fixed.
The Soviet economy slowed for about 20 years. Socially and politically, censorship and repression also increased as well.
By the central government, meaning that prices couldn't be adjusted to prevent losses. Another was that corruption was rampant, something which Brezhnev was happy to ignore. Economic stagnation led to mild social turmoil, as many in the USSR became fed up with worsening living conditions. Some men, such as Andrei Sakharov, became outspoken critics of the government, in particular the USSR's military and nuclear policies. Another was Alexander Solzhenitsyn, whose most famous work, The Gulag Archipelago, was published in the West and detailed life in the gulags and condemned the Communist Party for its role in said system. Solzhenitsyn was kicked out of the USSR in 1974, and Sakharov was exiled to Gorky, here. So economic stagnation dominated the Brezhnev era and was exacerbated by the high levels of military spending which was supposed to keep the USSR in line with the USA. By this point, both sides had amassed giant nuclear arsenals, and so they tried to calm this situation by pursuing a policy called détente. This was where both sides would
You don't entirely
actively improve relations with each other and reduce their nuclear arsenals, which was done by the 1969 SALT I Treaty and the 1975 Helsinki Accords. Détente came to an end though in 1979 when Brezhnev ordered the invasion of Afghanistan to prop up the failing communist government there. Long story short, it was an expensive 10-year disaster. Brezhnev wouldn't live to see the end of the war in Afghanistan, since he died in 1982 and was replaced by Yuri Andropov, the head of the KGB. Andropov saw relations with the USA and its president Ronald Reagan deteriorate, since both took a hard
Fuck Reagan.
line towards the other. Andropov died in 1984 and was succeeded by Konstantin Chernenko as the General Secretary.
And then he
Chernenko continued the same policies but would only be in office for 13 months, and he died in 1985. The reasons why these men died so quickly after taking office was simple. They were old. In fact, their success...
God damn it. This matter. Why is this? Why? I don't know why that was funny.
Mikhail Gorbachev was the only Soviet leader.
And he's still alive. I think. Last I heard, he was still alive.
who was actually born in the Soviet Union, i.e. after 1922. So Gorbachev was desperate to undo the economic stagnation of the previous decades, which had seen the US economy grow to twice the size of the Soviets. The USSR still had the second largest economy in the world though, but slow growth meant maintaining its international position was unsustainable. For the first 3 years of his premiership, Gorbachev instituted several reform packages to kickstart the Soviet economy and secure the USSR's future. These were perestroika, meaning restructuring, glasnost, meaning openness, and demokratizatsiya, meaning democratization. These combined would.
The main purpose was to drive economic growth. Democratization allowed for some non-communist independents to run for office.
Designed to make the USSR more economically decentralized, less censored, and allowed.
You know, I'm really curious about if they didn't have the, coup thing happen where Gorbachev was ousted from power and the Soviet Union just completely collapsed. I wonder how Gorbachev would have done. How his reforms and the things that he wanted to do, how well they would have done. Like, what would Russia look like today had Gorbachev had a full, I guess, stay of power or something like that?
For some limited election.
Maybe not like full, like what Putin has done, where he's been in power for 20 years, but maybe a decade of Gorbachev?
Involving non-communists. Ultimately, this was supposed to reform the USSR so that it would stay together and grow stronger, but fun fact, no. Openness for the press led to many Soviet citizens finding out just how much worse off they were than their capitalist counterparts and were made aware of any incompetencies in the government. One example was made public in April 1986 when a nuclear reactor at Chernobyl exploded. What really shocked the Soviet population was that they didn't hear about it for 2 weeks, meaning that their government was happy to censor disasters. Democratization gave a potential voice to all of this newfound discontent, and almost universally, when communist candidates ran against non-communist independents, they lost. So 1989 was a major year for Gorbachev and the Soviet Union. Gorbachev denounced repression and permitted free elections within the Warsaw Pact, which led to its collapse and the end of the communist governments there within a couple of years. Back in the USSR, nationalism and dissatisfaction with communism destabilized the country massively. One-party rule was formally ended, and soon after this, on March the 11th, 1990, Lithuania declared itself to be independent and others declared their intention to leave as well. Democratic reforms were quickly implemented, which opened the way to presidential elections in the numerous national territories within the USSR. 1990 also saw the rise of Boris Yeltsin, who had publicly quit the Communist Party and denounced Gorbachev's leadership.
You suck.
In June of 1991, Russia held its first ever presidential election in which Yeltsin won. Many leading communists were horrified by this, and so, led by Gennady Yanayev, they launched a coup on August 19th to overthrow the government and restore the Communist Party to full power. It was defied and the coup lasted only 2 days. Latvia and Estonia declared themselves independent during the turmoil, and 3 days after the coup, Gorbachev disbanded the Communist Party. By the 1st of December, these nations had declared their independence, and on the 21st, the Alma-Ata Protocol was signed, declaring the dissolution of the Soviet Union. On the 25th, Gorbachev resigned as the president of the USSR, and on the next day, the new government of the Russian Federation, led by Yeltsin, took over its duties, thus ending the Soviet project and beginning the long transition to a capitalist economy and all the trials that came with it. I hope you enjoyed this episode.
You know what? That was a good explanation of the decline and dissolution of the Soviet Union. Yeah, that surprisingly fit really well into 10 minutes. Now of course you could spend like a year of like class time just talking about the decline and dissolution of the Soviet Union if you wanted to get really specific and particular about it. But for a good summary that honestly had a surprising depth and nuance a bit, fit really well in 10 minutes. Like going into this, I thought this might feel like a little rushed. I was expecting, kind of like the Rome video. The Fall of Rome, that video felt a lot of information coming at you really fast. This one felt wonderfully well paced. Like, this was good and well done. I've got nothing to add here at the end. Let me know what you guys think of. Talk to me about Gorbachev, I guess. Yeah. What do you guys think about Gorbachev's reforms, and really, what do you think would have happened with the Soviet Union had, thinking more about it, and the more I'm like, you know what, with his reforms, there was pretty much no way of avoiding pretty much the dissolution of the Soviet Union. But do you think there was any chance of him maintaining power and perhaps being in charge of Russia as president? Do you think he could have won that election at all? Let me know what your thoughts are down below, I guess. Yeah, I'm just rambling here at the end. But that was 10-minute history of the decline and dissolution of the Soviet Union, short documentary by Future History. I don't know. History matters. Oh God, words. I hope you guys enjoyed. Remember to hit that like button and subscribe for more. And I will see you in the next video. Peace.